So here's a question that some have been asking recently. How do we continue to worship God while we're not allowed to sing in church? Now, some people in America have said that it's persecution to stop churches singing and have held massive worship meetings ignoring masks and social distancing as a protest. But are they right to? Well, as a pastor tweeted in response, you can actually worship without singing, and you can sing without worshipping. What really is worship? Let's find out. Hymns, dancing at the front of church, liturgy, singing along with the worship band while the fog machine pumps out more smoke. You might think of all of these things when you think of worship, and you wouldn't necessarily be wrong. Each of these is a way of worshipping God, but at the same time you can do all of these things without actually worshipping Him. And that's because worship is not an action alone. It's the mind and the heart behind an action that makes something worship. Worship literally means giving worth to something, and we do it all the time with everything. What do you give your attention to? Are there some things you think about more than other things? Well, you're giving worth to those things. And then that leads us to express that feeling by doing something about it. Like Minecraft is one of my all-time favourite games. I started playing it back in 2010, and it's my favourite to the point where I think about it quite a lot in my spare time. Now that's me giving worth to Minecraft, which leads to me expressing that feeling by playing it more and wanting to share that joy of playing it with others. Now, of course, it sounds weird to say that I worship Minecraft because worship is quite a spiritual word. But if we think of it as giving worth, then we worship a lot of the things all the time. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not bad to enjoy the good gifts that God has given us, but it becomes a problem when we give more worth to the gifts than to God who has given us the gifts in the first place. That's when it becomes something we call idolatry. So it goes then that with God being the most holy, glorious, kind, loving, wondrous and wonderful God who created everything that He is, He deserves our worship, and we should give Him the most worth. Now, I've said that that internal feeling leads us to expressing that feeling by doing something about it. Like with Minecraft, I express it by playing it. So then when we think of God and how great He is, it should lead to us wanting to express our worship of Him. So how do we do that? Well, some of the things we mentioned earlier are ways that we can express that: singing, dancing, liturgy. But Jesus makes it clear that our worship of God shouldn't just be expressed on a Sunday morning in church, but through our whole lives. In John 14:15, Jesus says, "If you love me, keep my commandments." So Jesus is saying that the main expression of loving and worshipping God is to obey Him. Now, when I talk about obeying, I'm not talking about out of obligation, but out of the love that we have for Him. Like when I lived with my parents, I did what they asked because I love and respect them. Now, worshipping God in church, and especially in a community, is really so important. But at the same time, God's main love language is obedience. This is why we can sing and dance before God and it not be worship, because we might not be reflecting that worship in the way we live our lives. Now, we see this numerous times in the Old Testament where God rejects the Israelites offering Him sacrifices in their worship while they're actively disobeying Him. Like in 1 Samuel 15:22, where it says, "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as obedience to His voice? Behold, obedience is better than sacrifice." This is like me when I was 16, jumping up and down at the front of church, while at the same time sleeping with my girlfriend, knowing that it was wrong. Now, even though I was jumping up and down and singing my heart out and telling God how much I loved Him, my worship didn't mean much at all because I was actively disobeying Him with the rest of my life. And even though I was being disobedient, God was really kind and He led me to a place where I saw that I was living that double life, and then I brought my life in line with what I was singing about in church, and then suddenly it does become worship. So, how do we continue to worship while we can't sing in church? Well, the same way we always have, by having obedient hearts. Now, it's worth noting that we as humans are not perfect. We mess up all the time, so it's important to clarify that it's not perfect obedience that God is looking for. He knows we're going to mess up and give in to sin. That's what the cross is for. Rather, God's looking for obedient hearts, who are people who want to try our best to obey and follow him because we love him, not out of obligation, but because we love and trust that he knows what's best for us, and we want to bring our lives in line with what we might sing about in church. But for now, I'll see you next time.